Good morning, everyone. Today I will explain about the positive feedback system and negative feedback systems which are included in your syllabus unit 1. So, what is positive feedback system? It is a system in which the output, that means the product, increases or enhances the original stimulus. Original stimulus means the reactant of the reaction. So, in case of positive feedback system, the output or the product of a reaction increases the effect of the original stimulus or the reactant of the reaction. Examples of positive feedback system is regulation of blood clotting. So how the blood clotting regulations becomes an examples of positive feedback system? In case of the regulations of the blood clotting process, the blood clotting is the product or the output of the clotting process, and I think we also know which is required to form a clot. Platelet is required to form a clot. So in this blood clotting process, platelet is platelet acts as a reactant. So let's discuss how the regulations of blood clotting becomes a positive feedback system. When a cell injury break or tear our blood vessel, at that moment the feedback cycle initiates or started. So why when the clotting happens or occurs as the platelet adhere to the site of the injury. When the platelet adhere to the site of the injury, then they release the different chemicals or the clotting factors. The more amount of these chemicals or the clotting factor released, they attract the more amount of the platelets to form the clot. At this process, and this process is continued until the break is completely sealed by the newly formed clot. So here the blood clot, that means the product of this blood clotting process, increases the release of the platelets, and the release of the platelets increases the release of the more clotting factors to form a new clot. That means the product of this blood clotting process increases or enhances the effects of the reactant or the original stimulus, that means platelets. That's why the regulations of the blood clottings is an examples of positive feedback system. So now I will discuss about the negative feedback system. In case of negative feedback system, the reactant of the reaction and the product of the reactions move in a opposite direction. That means the stimulus, that means the which is required to proceed the reactions or reactant, and the output, that means the product of the reaction, moving in the opposite direction. Examples of negative feedback system is regulation of or control of blood glucose levels by insulin. So let's discuss how the control or regulations of blood glucose level by insulin becomes an examples of negative feedback system. In this process, blood glucose level acts as a product of a reaction, and the insulin acts as a reactant of the reaction. Clear? During the after eating, the blood glucose level is increases in our body. Then the receptor in our body sense a change. After that, The insulin is secreted from the pancreatic beta pancreatic islets into the blood, and the insulin secretion continues until the blood glucose level becomes low or becomes normal. That means the insulin controls the increased level of the blood glucose level. When the blood glucose level is increased in our body, then the insulin secretion is increased and they decreases the level of the blood glucose in our body. That means the blood glucose level is decreased due to increased secretion of the insulin. So the product blood glucose level increased and the reactant insulin secretion is decreased. So they move in the opposite directions. That's why the regulation or the control of the blood glucose level is an example of negative feedback system.